I knew something was off. The second Brad Cooper swaggered into my workspace like he had just been personally knighted by the chief executive officer. Fresh out of some online leadership seminar and wearing a grin that belonged in a cheap hair gel commercial, he plopped into the guest chair across from my desk and crossed his legs. "So, you are the veteran I am supposed to shadow," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension only a 32-year-old vice president of operations could manage. Shadowing was his word for it. In reality, he was circling me like a vulture that had just spotted a target with 15 years of experience and a pension plan. I am 54 years old, and I have spent the last 15 years of my life building, maintaining, and defending the financial systems of this corporation. I knew every line of code in our database, every quirk of the ledger, and every historical compromise we had made to keep the system running. Brad, on the other hand, did not know the difference between a database index and a hole in the ground. Earlier that morning, Thomas had cornered me near the coffee machine, smelling of mint mouthwash and panic. Thomas was a senior accountant who had been with the firm for 9 years and knew how to read the political tea leaves better than anyone else in our department. "We just need a little operational redundancy in case you ever decide to take a long vacation," he had told me, using the soothing, hollow tone managers use when they are preparing to hand you a cardboard box for your desk. I had not taken a single vacation day in 6 years. I once worked through a severe case of shingles and a fractured collarbone because the payroll processing cycle does not halt for personal injury. So, the redundancy line was absolute garbage. Hunter Finch, the new trainee, was not there to learn. He was there to replace me, and, to make matters worse, the young man insisted on narrating every single mouse click I made as if he were hosting a technical broadcast for teenagers. "Oh, spreadsheet macros, outstanding," Hunter muttered, typing furiously on a mechanical keyboard he had brought from home. "So, you built this entire reconciliation database yourself?" I simply nodded. He did not need to know that I had spent 9 months coding that system from scratch because Brad once had a public tantrum over an $18 travel reimbursement, showing up 12 hours late. Hunter typed like a caffeinated squirrel, attempting to impress me with questions that sounded like they had been generated by an automated writing program after a long night of coding. Meanwhile, Brad kept hovering behind us like a malfunctioning smart vacuum. "Hey, David, quick item," Brad said, leaning over my shoulder so close I could smell his expensive cologne. "What level of access are we granting Hunter for the primary vendor ledger?" "Read only," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the ledger. Brad did not appreciate that. I could feel his irritation before he even spoke, radiating like heat off asphalt. "We might as well give him full administrative clearance," Brad insisted. "He is going to need to run the reports independently anyway." I smiled, kept my hands on the keyboard, and did not change a single permission level. I had seen this play before. They wanted the veteran to hand over the keys to the castle to a cheaper, younger model, and then show him the door. Hunter was 22, fresh out of a Midwestern university with a degree in business administration and an attitude that suggested he had personally invented the spreadsheet. He wore wireless earbuds and carried a massive metal water bottle that he constantly clanked against the metal edge of my desk. Every time I demonstrated a system process, he would sigh, write something down in a leather-bound notebook, and make a comment about how we could optimize the workflow. He spent half his time looking at his phone and the other half asking me questions that revealed he did not understand basic accounting principles. He was the classic corporate rookie, high on confidence, low on actual utility, and completely oblivious to the reality of the work. But I kept playing my role. I was the cooperative, quiet veteran, guiding Hunter through the complex architecture of our corporate accounts as if nothing were amiss. But I was observing. I noticed how Hunter already knew the folder path for the vendor templates before I even opened the directory. I noticed how Brad kept tracking our screen sharing sessions on the internal chat application. I noticed when Hunter asked if we kept historical database backups from 5 years ago and smiled like we shared a secret. We did not, but I was about to ensure we had a record of everything. At one point, Hunter tried to build rapport by calling Brad the greatest supervisor of all time. I almost choked on my mineral water. Brad once printed out a digital picture believing it was a slides presentation. If Brad was a genius, then my golden retriever was a structural engineer. But I kept smiling. I instructed. I explained formulas and database keys and the specific approval loops you never bypass unless you want to explain yourself to a panel of federal regulators. And the entire time, I let Brad believe he was 2 steps ahead of the old guy at the desk. The truth was, I had already rewritten the board. The game was mine, and they were just moving their pieces where I wanted them. The upscale restaurant Brad selected for the client lunch was one of those minimalist sushi spots with tiny rock gardens near the entrance and sliding shoji screens that separated the dining alcoves. It was just pretentious enough for Brad to pretend he possessed refined international culture and global business sensibilities. The interior was quiet, smelling of fresh cedar wood and soy sauce, with the soft, melodic sounds of koto music playing from hidden speakers. He kept calling the food authentic, though it was clear he had simply searched the internet for the most expensive establishment within a 5-mile radius of the corporate office. I arrived 15 minutes early because punctuality is an old habit of mine, and I prefer to locate the exits when walking into an ambush. The chief executive officer, Mr. Kenji Sato, arrived shortly after me, accompanied by 2 junior executives who moved with quiet deference. Mr. Sato wore a tailored charcoal suit and possessed the sharp, analytical eyes of a man who had built an international conglomerate from the ground up. Unfortunately, Yoshiko Mori, his longtime executive assistant and translator, was delayed at the airport due to a missed connection in San Francisco. Brad predictably saw this as an opportunity to showcase his non-existent skills. "I guess I will have to put my language software lessons to the test," he joked, nudging Mr. Sato as they sat down, already perspiring through his button-down shirt. He bragged that he had a continuous streak of 45 days on his mobile learning application, as if that made him an expert in international relations. We ordered our meals. I stuck to green tea and simple vegetable tempura because my focus was entirely on the conversation. Brad was already 2 cups of hot sake deep, laughing at his own stories and speaking a broken, preschool level of Japanese with the unearned confidence of a tourist who thinks buying a souvenir makes him a native speaker. He would shout basic greetings with a thick, grating accent that made the waitstaff wince politely as they served our plates. He even tried to use chopsticks to eat a large piece of sushi, only to drop it onto the pristine white tablecloth, laughing loudly to cover his embarrassment while the junior executives stared in silent discomfort. It was somewhere between his 3rd mispronunciation of a simple gratitude phrase and a loud boast about how he was streamlining our administrative processes that he leaned closer to Mr. Sato and spoke in Japanese. He said that I was rather old-fashioned and that I would be gone by the next quarter. He chuckled, looking directly at me with glazed, arrogant eyes, confident that his words had floated right over my head like steam off the miso soup, but I understood every single word. What Brad did not know, because he never bothered to ask my background, was that I had spent 7 years in Tokyo. I had survived on cheap convenience store rice balls and drafty apartments while completing my Master of Science in Financial Systems at Todai. I had studied the language until I could draft tax audits in complex characters. I spent long, exhausting nights under the dim light of a Shinjuku apartment, translating payroll ledgers and learning the intricate details of Japanese corporate compliance under the guidance of my former mentor, Professor Kenzo Watanabe. I had worked for 3 years at a Tokyo accounting firm, auditing financial statements and navigating pension filings that would make most American executives cry into their ledgers. When Brad called me obsolete in Japanese, I did not frown. I reached for my teacup with the absolute calm of a surgeon preparing an incision. Something inside me clicked into place. It was not anger, but a cold, clear certainty. I was not going to argue. I was not going to complain to human resources. I was going to dismantle Brad Cooper, and I was going to do it using the very system he thought he was stealing from me. I spent the remainder of the lunch listening to Brad ramble about digital transformations and paradigm shifts. I watched him present Mr. Sato with a printed report containing charts I had spent 3 weeks building, though Brad had replaced my name with his own on the cover page. I noticed the brief, subtle glance Mr. Sato gave him. It was not one of admiration, but of polite tolerance. Mr. Sato was a traditional leader who valued precision, loyalty, and quiet competence. He had little patience for loud managers who spent more time self-promoting than delivering results. I could see that Brad's performance was not having the desired effect, even if Brad himself was too self-absorbed to notice. I sat quietly, drinking my tea, observing the dynamics of the table, and noting how the junior executives took brief, mechanical notes without looking up. As we departed the restaurant, Brad slapped me on the shoulder with patronizing warmth. "Excellent job staying quiet during the business talk, David," he laughed. "I found it highly educational, Brad," I replied, offering a polite bow. He did not catch the coldness in my voice. Most arrogant men miss those details. As I walked to my car in the afternoon rain, I whispered a phrase to myself in Japanese. My turn. I was no longer just an employee waiting for a pink slip. I was the person who was going to write his termination papers. I spent the entire weekend in my study with a large pot of black coffee and our internal payroll database pulled up on my personal monitors. The room was quiet, save for the steady tapping of rain against the glass and the soft breathing of my old golden retriever, Max, who slept near the desk. I was not looking for an apology. I was searching for documentation. The first anomaly appeared almost immediately. I discovered that Brad Cooper had manually approved his own year-end bonus 4 days after the system window had officially closed. It was a clever adjustment, hidden beneath the complex transactions of the fourth quarter cost center alignment. He had used a master override code that was supposed to be reserved for payroll emergencies, like retroactive adjustments for employees returning from parental leave. Unfortunately for Brad, I was the engineer who had written the security protocols for those override codes. Over the next 10 hours, I cataloged my findings into a secure spreadsheet titled Project Crimson. To trace the fraud, I wrote several detailed queries using system software to extract data from the user privilege log and the transaction history tables. I filtered the records by user identification codes and network addresses, showing that the overrides had been performed from Brad's residential network connection at 2 o'clock in the morning. I discovered that Brad had disabled security logging for certain override commands on the primary database, thinking it would prevent detection. However, he did not know that I had built a secondary, independent audit log that wrote to an encrypted file on a remote server that he could not access. I also checked the routing transit numbers for the consulting transfers and discovered they mapped directly to a private personal account in Delaware. The records were damning. Vendor number 6291, listed as Summit Consulting, had been paid $9,800 in the third quarter. There was no invoice, no statement of work, and no record of any consulting agreement in our systems. Vendor number 7435, under the name Aero Advisory, had its address listed as a shared workspace in Chicago that had closed its doors 2 years prior. Finally, Project Summit Sync, which had been marked as completed and closed, suddenly showed $24,000 in consulting fees backdated to the middle of February. Brad was not just preparing to replace me. He was embezzling corporate funds, and he was doing it with the technical sophistication of a teenager trying to bypass a home network filter. Thomas came to my desk the following Tuesday afternoon with a worried look on his face, handing me a printed copy of the payroll budget draft where Brad had proposed to slash the technical support budget by 30% to cover consulting overhead. I took the paper, thanked him, and quietly scanned it into my digital file. Yet, I did not alert the local office. I went back to work on Monday and continued training Hunter as if nothing had changed. I showed him the standard reconciliation procedures and smiled through his condescending comments. "This ledger seems fairly basic, David," he said, sipping his coffee. I simply agreed. Hunter asked if we could simplify the administrative controls around vendor onboarding. I blinked twice, told him it was a great suggestion, and adjusted his security credentials. However, I routed his permissions through a sandbox environment I had created. Any change Hunter attempted to make to the primary database would now generate an automated alert sent directly to my personal email, complete with his digital signature and a network timestamp. Hunter came to my desk the following afternoon, complaining that his system access felt restricted. I explained in dense technical jargon that the network routing was undergoing a standard maintenance cycle, which he completely accepted because he did not understand system infrastructure. I wanted Brad to believe Hunter was progressing rapidly. I wanted him to feel secure enough to make his final move. I wanted him to think the old veteran was completely passive and easily managed. I even began introducing small, intentional formatting errors in my training files to see if Hunter would catch them. He did not. He was too busy copying my files to his personal storage drive. But Brad was paying attention. I discovered that Brad had accessed my internal messages after hours, unaware that the software logs every unauthorized viewing of an archive file. He had used a supervisor security key to bypass the standard user restrictions. Believing he was leaving no trace, I saved those access logs as well. Every falsified document, every unauthorized override, and every stolen file was organized, cataloged, and translated into clean Japanese. Brad once told a group of managers that he liked working with me because I did not make waves. He was correct. I did not make waves. I was the undercurrent, and he had no idea how deep the water was. By the time Friday arrived, I had built a chronological file of his entire fraudulent operation. I had the dates, the amounts, and the digital signatures. I was just waiting for the right moment to deliver the file, and that moment was approaching quickly. I had organized the files in a clean, logical format that would be easy for an external auditor to follow, complete with direct references to our internal policy guidelines. The contact information was buried in an old directory from my early years with the firm. Yoshiko Mori, the chief executive officer's senior assistant in Tokyo, had once managed all stateside operations before the company restructured. She was known as a legend within the corporation, a woman of absolute precision who could silence an entire boardroom with a single glance. We had worked together 10 years ago on a reporting audit that saved the company $50,000, establishing a deep foundation of mutual respect. During that project, we had spent weeks on video calls, troubleshooting data discrepancies, and building a robust system framework that unified our regional offices. I sent her a brief, formal message written in polite business Japanese. It has been many years, Yoshiko. This is David Vance. I have discovered some critical anomalies in our operations ledger that require your attention. She responded 3 hours later with her trademark efficiency, requesting a secure video conference. When we connected 2 nights later, I sat in my home office, while she sat in a glass-walled conference room in Tokyo, the city lights reflecting off the window behind her seat. It was morning in Tokyo and late evening in Portland, but she looked as composed as if she were starting a regular business day. Yoshiko mentioned that the Corporate Compliance Committee in Tokyo had already been quietly monitoring the Portland branch expenses due to rising operational overhead, and David's forensic audit was the final piece of evidence they needed to take action. I did not present accusations. Instead, I presented data. I shared a single, clean spreadsheet detailing the unauthorized payments to the fake consulting firms. Yoshiko did not speak for a long moment. She studied the numbers, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. "Are you certain of the origin of these overrides?" "David," she asked in Japanese. "Yes," I replied. The override credentials matched the vice president's private signature key. Over the next 10 days, I provided Yoshiko with a steady stream of verified documentation. I sent transaction histories, system logs, and the unauthorized access records showing Brad reading my private messages. I translated every spreadsheet column and added detailed annotations explaining the discrepancies in our regional accounts. I did not include personal complaints about Brad's behavior or his plan to replace. I explained the exact mechanism Brad used to forge the signature, highlighting that it violated both corporate policy and national financial regulations. Yoshiko's replies became shorter and more focused, a clear sign that she was preparing a formal case for the executive board. She asked for raw copies of the database tables and original metadata exports to ensure the evidence was legally bulletproof. She printed out the spreadsheets in her Tokyo office, comparing them line by line with the official corporate filings and highlighting the discrepancies with yellow ink. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the Portland office grew increasingly tense. The weather outside was a steady, gray fog that hung over the Willamette River, matching the cold, quiet tension building inside the building. Several colleagues, including Thomas, noticed Brad and Hunter whispering in the conference room and warned me that something was happening behind closed doors. On Tuesday morning, I received a calendar invitation for a meeting titled Summit Sync Transition. The organizer was Hunter Finch. Brad walked past my workspace a few minutes later, holding his coffee mug and smiling. "I thought it was time we gave you some breathing room, David," Brad said, his tone dripping with false concern. "Hunter is going to take over the project management responsibilities for the ledger starting next month." I thanked him for his consideration and returned to my work. Hunter had already started moving several of my physical reference binders and policy manuals from my shelves to his own cubicle, claiming it was for efficient workspace alignment. He had also created several directories on the shared network drive, naming them after himself, and archiving my original project folders, unaware that the shared server was being mirrored to a secure backup directory that I controlled. I also overheard Brad making passive-aggressive remarks in the break room about legacy practices and the need for fresh leadership. I simply ignored the noise. An hour later, an email was sent to the entire regional department, with the chief executive officer copied on the thread. The subject line announced the successful optimization of our payroll systems. In the body of the email, Brad congratulated himself for modernizing our legacy infrastructure and stated that the transition of the Summit Sync project was complete under his direct supervision. It was a public claim of victory, designed to establish Hunter as my replacement before the quarterly review. But the final confirmation came once I examined the compliance attachment at the bottom of the email. It was a regional authorization form that appeared to bear my digital signature, confirming that the new process met all corporate compliance standards. I checked the document's metadata. The signature block had been copied from a report I had submitted 6 months earlier. The approval timestamp had been forged using a script from our testing sandbox. Brad had not just reassigned my projects. He had forged my signature on a federal compliance document. I immediately exported the file and sent it to Yoshiko with a single note. The signature on this document was fabricated. I received no reply, but I knew the silence meant the trap was set. The invitation arrived on Friday afternoon, scheduled for late Monday morning. The subject line read "Fourth Quarter Restructuring and Operational Efficiency," and attendance was mandatory for all senior staff. I did not reply to the invitation, but I spent the weekend preparing my final notes. I knew this was the meeting Brad had planned as his triumph, the moment he would formally announce my redundancy and present Hunter as the future of the department. When I entered the conference room on Monday, the atmosphere was uncharacteristically quiet. The board members sat in high-backed chairs, and Brad stood at the front of the room, adjusting his tie and checking his digital presentation. The room had a panoramic view of the Portland skyline, but the mood inside was cold. Hunter sat near the corner, holding a notepad and looking pleased, convinced he was about to step into my role. I chose a seat in the front row, directly opposite Brad, and placed my notebook on the table. There was a large projector screen showing the first slide of his presentation and a side table with coffee and pastries that remained untouched. Brad had displayed a slide titled Synergy and Streamlining, which featured a flowchart showing Hunter at the top of the department, and my name in a small, dashed box labeled Legacy Transition Support. Brad began his presentation. He clicked through slides detailing cost reductions and organizational alignment, frequently looking at Mr. Sato for approval, though the chief executive officer remained motionless. On the third slide, which listed personnel changes and highlighted my name under transition candidates, his voice faltered slightly. He cleared his throat and stated that before proceeding, he needed to address an administrative issue. "We received a notification regarding some internal files that may have been altered," Brad said, attempting to project calm confidence. "We are working with our legal team to resolve the matter." Mr. Sato, who had remained silent at the head of the table, raised his hand slightly. The room became completely still. "We are not working with your legal team, Brad," Mr. Sato said, his voice low and cold. "They are working with us." Another board member slid a folder across the table toward Brad. Can you explain the $9,800 transfer to Summit Consulting? The board member asked. Brad's face paled. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. That was a standard vendor payment, Brad stammered. He tried to claim it was a specialized consultancy providing marketing services, but Mr. Sato pointed out that the database registered the firm as a financial advisory service, exposing the immediate fabrication. At that exact moment, the door to the conference room opened. Yoshiko Mori walked in, carrying a dark blue folder. She did not look at Brad. She walked directly to Mr. Sato and handed him the documents. Mr. Sato opened the folder, scanned the pages, and passed them to the other board members. Yoshiko turned to face the room. This manager, Brad Cooper, has fabricated compliance signatures and diverted corporate funds to unauthorized accounts, Yoshiko stated in clear, precise English. The forensic audit from Tokyo confirms the discrepancies. She displayed the forged compliance document side by side with my original signature records on the screen, showing the exact metadata mismatches, and showed that the funds had been routed directly to a bank account registered to Brad's personal holding company. Brad looked as if the floor had vanished beneath him. He attempted to argue, claiming it was a personal grudge and that I was trying to sabotage his career. I stood up slowly. I did not raise my voice. I looked directly at Brad and spoke in clear, fluent Japanese. When you joked at lunch about firing me because I was old-fashioned, you forgot that I spent 7 years in Tokyo studying the very systems you tried to exploit. You do not understand this company, and you do not understand the language you tried to use against me. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Mr. Sato nodded once toward the security officers waiting at the door. They stepped forward and escorted Brad from the room. He did not say another word, his laptop left open on the table. His career ended in a matter of minutes. Hunter sat frozen in his chair, his notepad forgotten, realizing his mentor had just vanished. Mr. Sato turned to me and spoke in Japanese, thanking me for protecting the company's integrity and recognizing my long dedication. He then walked up to me, shook my hand formally, and stated that my commitment to accuracy and compliance was a model for the entire international branch. He announced that the board had approved my promotion to Director of Financial Systems, reporting directly to the Tokyo headquarters. The contract had been finalized 3 weeks ago during my discussions with Yoshiko. I gathered my notebook, offered a formal bow to the board, and walked out of the room. I did not smile. I did not boast. I spent the afternoon reassuring Thomas and the other accountants that their positions were secure and that the systems would be managed with integrity. I simply walked back to my desk in calm, fluent silence, knowing that the systems were finally secure and that my years of hard work had been vindicated. As I sat in my new office looking out at the city lights in the evening, I thought of my 7 years in Tokyo and how those long hours of study had led to this quiet triumph.